Let's start with the less crazy and work our way towards the insane ones. Fidel Castro, Cuba, picture this. It's 1959 and this charismatic lawyer-turned-guerrilla walks into Havana, smoking on a cigar and wearing a uniform that screams, "I just came from the jungle, but make it fashion." Legend has it he once spoke for 7 hours and 10 minutes at the UN, probably because he couldn't find the exit and decided to wing it. On a serious note, Castro overthrew the US-backed Batista regime and established a one-party socialist state. He nationalized industries, implemented social reforms, and cozied up to the Soviet Union, leading to the infamous Cuban Missile Crisis that had the world on the edge of its seat. His regime was marked by economic struggles, political repression, and a frosty relationship with the US that outlasted 11 American presidents. Castro also survived many assassination attempts. The CIA reportedly made over 600 attempts on Castro's life, turning him into the ultimate slippery target and probably giving him the world's worst case of paranoia. Let's dive into this circus of failed hit jobs. 1. The exploding cigar. Yes, this was a real plan. The CIA thought, hey, this guy loves cigars, let's make one go boom. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. 2. The poison wetsuit. They tried to give Castro a contaminated diving suit as a gift. Castro, apparently not in the mood for scuba that day, didn't take the bait. 3. The Beauty and the Beast. They attempted to recruit one of Castro's ex-lovers to slip him poison pills. She allegedly hid them in her cold cream, but they dissolved. Oops, Castro once quipped. If surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic event, I would win the gold medal. Love him or hate him, you've got to admit, the man had staying power. He finally stepped down in 2008, handing over the reins to his brother Raoul. Because nothing says democracy like keeping it in the family, right? Adolf Hitler, Germany. Hitler quite possibly has to be the most known failed art student of all time. Imagine being rejected from art school and thinking, you know what? I'll just conquer Europe instead. Hitler rose to power in 1930s Germany, riding a wave of economic despair and nationalistic fervor. He had a distinctive look, that toothbrush mustache and side-parted hair. The Führer was known for his fiery speeches, dramatic gestures, and an ego so inflated it could have lifted the Hindenburg. He managed to convince a nation that the path to greatness involved invading their neighbors and committing unspeakable atrocities. Hitler's resume alone was responsible for World War II in Europe, the Holocaust, and the deaths of millions. His racist ideology of Aryan supremacy led to the systematic persecution and genocide of Jews, as well as the murder of Roma people, homosexuals, and other groups deemed undesirable by the Nazi state. Hitler's military strategies were often as questionable as his morals. He made decisions like invading Russia in winter, which historically has worked out for exactly 0 people. In the end, with the Allies closing in and Berlin in ruins, Hitler decided to say goodbye to the world from his bunker by shooting himself in the head. Mao Zedong, China. Mao rose to power faster than a dumpling in hot oil, leading the Communist Party to victory in 1949. He had a history for catchy slogans and grand ideas that often backfired spectacularly. Take the Great Leap Forward, for instance. It was supposed to industrialize China overnight, but ended up being more of a great stumble sideways. Our man Mao wasn't content with just running the country. He wanted to be a philosopher too. His little red book became the must-have accessory of the 1960s. Not because it was a good read, mind you, but because not carrying it could land you in big trouble. Mao's policies led to widespread famine, political persecution, and the deaths of millions. The Cultural Revolution he launched in 1966 aimed to purge the country of impure elements, resulting in chaos, economic disruption, and the destruction of countless cultural artifacts. Mao had a complicated relationship with smart people. He once said, "The more books you read, the more stupid you become." Coming from a guy who wrote a book everyone was forced to read, despite the devastating consequences of his rule, Mao remains a controversial figure in China. His image still graces the country's currency, proving that some leaders never really go out of circulation. Kim Jong-il, North Korea. Kim inherited power from his father, Kim Il-sung, in 1994, proving that in North Korea, nepotism isn't just encouraged, it's practically the national sport. But more interestingly, let's talk about his legendary list of accomplishments. 1. Golf prodigy, supposedly shot 38 under par on his first try, including 11 holes in one. Tiger Woods? Who? 2. Hennessy's best customer, once reportedly the world's largest buyer of Hennessy cognac. Because nothing says workers' paradise like $700 bottles of alcohol. Kim's rule was marked by a continuation of his father's authoritarian policies, including maintaining a cult of personality, pursuing nuclear weapons, and enforcing strict control over information and movement. His regime was characterized by human rights abuses, economic mismanagement, and international isolation. Kim's foreign policy was like a game of nuclear chicken, with occasional bouts of "let's make a deal" thrown in for good measure. Despite presiding over a country facing severe food shortages, Kim reportedly lived a life of luxury, complete with lavish palaces and gourmet cuisine. When he wasn't busy being the dear leader, Kim found time to reportedly write 6 operas, all in 2 years. In the end, Kim Jong-il's North Korea was like a real-life version of The Truman Show, except nobody told the North Koreans it was all make-believe. Pol Pot, Cambodia. Imagine if your annoying friend who's always talking about going off-grid and reconnecting with nature suddenly became a dictator. That's Pol Pot for you, but with a lot more murder. Pol Pot rose to power in 1975, leading the Khmer Rouge to victory in the Cambodian Civil War. His grand vision? To create an agricultural utopia by forcibly evicting people from cities and making everyone a farmer. Because nothing says progress like turning your entire country into a giant, deadly farm simulator. Some of Pol Pot's greatest hits include Year Zero, decided to reset Cambodia's calendar to Year Zero. Anti-smart people. Wearing glasses? That's a beating. Or worse. He targeted intellectuals with such fervor that you'd think books had personally offended him. Khmer Rouge, Fashion Week. Everyone got to wear the same black pajamas. How thoughtful of him to solve the what to wear dilemma for an entire nation. On top of all that, he banned all foreign influences, including medicine. Who needs penicillin when you have rice patties, right? Pol Pot's regime, known as Democratic Kampuchea, was responsible for one of the worst genocides in modern history. The Khmer Rouge's policies led to the deaths of an estimated 1.5 to 2 million people, about a quarter of Cambodia's population, through execution, starvation, disease, and overwork. Pol Pot's killing fields became synonymous with unimaginable cruelty. His regime targeted ethnic minorities, religious groups, and anyone perceived as an enemy of the state. Family ties were severed, religion was banned, and money was abolished. Despite the horrors of his rule, Pol Pot managed to evade justice for years after the Vietnamese invasion ousted the Khmer Rouge in 1979. He lived in the jungle, occasionally popping up like a genocidal Where's Waldo. Idi Amin, Uganda. To imagine him, think if your local gym's most boastful bodybuilder suddenly became a dictator, and you've got a pretty good picture of old Idi Amin. Amin seized power in a military coup in 1971, proving that in Uganda, the fastest way to the top was through the army barracks. He quickly established himself as the walking definition of megalomaniac, with a list of self-bestowed titles longer than a CVS receipt. His full self-styled title included His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas, and conqueror of the British Empire and Africa in general and Uganda in particular. Try fitting that on a business card. He also wrote letters to world leaders like Queen Elizabeth II and Richard Nixon, offering advice and proposing marriages. He also claimed he kept the deposed President Milton Obote's head in his freezer and would occasionally talk to it. Amin's rule was characterized by extreme brutality, ethnic persecution, and economic mismanagement. His regime was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 Ugandans through executions, torture, and forced disappearances. Amin's foreign policy was as erratic as his domestic one. He picked fights with Tanzania, leading to a war that eventually ousted him from power in 1979. He also had a bizarre obsession with Israel, once offering to be king of Israel and Palestine to solve their conflict. Spoiler alert, they didn't take him up on it. Despite the horrors of his regime, Amin managed to cultivate a larger-than-life public image. He was known for his towering physique as he was a former boxing champion, flamboyant uniforms, and outrageous public statements. He spent his final years in exile in Saudi Arabia, leaving behind a country struggling to recover from his disastrous rule. Muammar Gaddafi, Libya. This guy was the self-styled brother leader of Libya who treated the country like his personal wardrobe for 42 years. Gaddafi seized power in a bloodless coup in 1969, proving that in Libya, the fastest way to redecorate the presidential palace was through the military. He quickly established himself as the walking definition of flamboyant dictator, with a sense of style that would make Lady Gaga look conservative. He also surrounded himself with a team of women bodyguards, because why not add a dash of Charlie's Angels to your dictatorship? Gaddafi wrote The Green Book, his political philosophy that was part manifesto, part stream of consciousness rambling. It became required reading in Libya, proving that sometimes the pen is mightier than common sense. Gaddafi's rule was marked by severe repression, support for international terrorism, and erratic foreign policy. His regime was responsible for numerous human rights abuses, including the infamous Lockerbie bombing in 1988. Gaddafi's foreign policy was like a geopolitical mood ring, constantly changing color. One day he'd be declaring himself the King of Kings of Africa. The next he'd be cozying up to Western powers. His speeches at the UN were legendary for their length and incoherence, once speaking for over 90 minutes and tearing up the UN Charter. Despite the brutality of his regime, Gaddafi managed to present himself as a revolutionary leader fighting against imperialism. He used Libya's oil wealth to support various causes and groups around the world, playing the role of international provocateur with gusto. Gaddafi's rule came to a violent end in 2011 during the Arab Spring uprisings. His final months saw him vowing to fight to the last drop of blood, while simultaneously appearing to be in complete denial about the reality of his situation. Saddam Hussein, Iraq. Picture this. It's 1979 and a mustachioed man with a penchant for berets and brutal purges just seized control of Iraq. Meet Saddam Hussein, the guy who looked at dictatorship and thought, you know what this needs? More statues of me? Saddam's rise to power was like a bloody game of musical chairs, except when the music stopped, his opponents ended up 6 feet under. He quickly established himself as the Middle East strongman, with a leadership style that could be described as Stalin, but make it desert chic. Some greatest hits from Saddam's reign of terror and ego were the fact that he used chemical weapons on his own people, proving that when it came to war crimes, he was an overachiever. He also turned oil for food into oil for gold-plated toilets, while his people queued for basic necessities. In his free time, he wrote novels that were part propaganda, part fever dream. Imagine if Tom Clancy had a love child with North Korean state media, and you're halfway there. Hussein's Iraq was a nightmarish police state where dissent was crushed, minorities were persecuted, and the tyrant's word was law. His regime was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands, including the genocidal Anfal campaign against the Kurds. Saddam's foreign policy was like a toddler playing Risk, impulsive, destructive, and prone to tantrums. He kicked off the Iran-Iraq War in 1980, an 8-year bloodbath that achieved precisely nothing. Not content with that disaster, he then invaded Kuwait in 1990, effectively poking the hornet's nest of international intervention. Despite the brutality of his rule, Saddam masterfully played the geopolitical game, presenting himself alternately as a protector against Islamic extremism, a champion of pan-Arabism, and a thorn in the side of Western imperialism. He was a chameleon in a military uniform, changing colors faster than you could say weapons inspection. Saddam's downfall came in 2003 with the US-led invasion. His final act was a tragicomedy. The once mighty dictator found hiding in a spider hole, looking like a desert hermit who'd lost his way.